This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Latirzo, boxing observer. And if I say a mosquito can pull a plow, don't ask how, hitch him up. Joined by co-host, former 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, smiling Jack Hirsch. Jack, how are you tonight?
Pretty good. In a few weeks, my title is going to have to be altered. Michael Spinks' biographer, because the book is going to be out in a few weeks' time. And you know Michael very well. Frank, we had a heated producer backstage before the show, and I wonder who gets more heated. You, when people tell you that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is the greatest fighter of all time. Our producer, when he hears you say the Philadelphia Eagles are locked to win the Super Bowl and his Lions have no chance. Who gets
they
more
have none.
heated? You or Brian on? Who gets more
I don't know.
heated?
It's close, Jack. Here's the thing. Brian probably doesn't believe this, but there is no bigger Eagles hater on this planet than Frank Latirzo. However, I live in reality, and they are clearly the best team. And as I said to Brian before we came on the air, there are 10 games left, counting the playoffs. I believe the Eagles will go 9-1 or 8-2 during the last 10 games, and they will win the Super Bowl. They will beat whoever comes out of the AFC. And in the NFC, there's not one team, Jack, not your Buccaneers, not his Lions, not the Rams, not the Packers, and not the 49ers are going into Philly on a cold day in late January and beating the Eagles. Not happening.
Just on a side note, your Miami Dolphins have won 2 games in a row. They're still mathematically in it. If they can mostly run the table, who knows? Maybe, they could sneak into the
Jack,
playoffs.
I am so tired of that. Every year it's the same. Well, we're not out of it. You're out of it. You beat the Bills. You brag about that, but you lose to the Falcons. I don't want to hear. And the Dolphins were so lucky to win yesterday.
They won. But speaking winning or losing, someone asked me today, it was kind of switching to boxing. I'll stay on football a little more if you want, Frank, but you got to reel me in on that. They asked me what happened to Chris Eubank this weekend because he looked so bad in losing a lopsided decision to Conor Benn. How can he have beaten Conor Benn 7 months ago and then look so bad 7 months later? Now, people are going to say, well, it's losing the weight. He was weight drained, this and that. And maybe that was the reason, but we don't know whether that's the reason for sure. Could it possibly be he didn't train hard in between fights? And that's when fighters usually lose it at an advanced age. And he is 36. What went wrong in that fight, Frank?
Jack, I've only saw the highlights of the fight. I tried to find it the next day. I couldn't find it. So I really can't speak to that, but I will not say it's like he looked good the last time. He didn't get washed up overnight. Ben stepped up, fought a smart fight from what I've been told by people that saw the fight who hold an opinion I value. And they said from the beginning that Eubanks was never in the fight. So what does that tell you? That tells you it's one of two things. Either he's on the wrong side of the hill, or maybe getting down to weight took too much out of him. I don't know, but let's give Ben credit for fighting a very smart fight.
Are you a believer in the off-night theory? Because I'm not a believer in that when it comes to boxing, but I can't completely dismiss it either. And just as an athlete, and all of us are athletes to a degree, even if we just go out to jog, and I like to run. There's some days I'll go out to run. I got nothing, Frank. My legs have no bounce in them. I'm done, and I can't pick the pace up in the slightest. There's nothing there. And do you think a thing like that happens to fighters for whatever reason? They enter the ring, they think they're ready, they think the training went well, they did everything they were supposed to do, and nothing is there. And it could have happened to them at a younger age as well.
Jack, I think that can be a part of it, but I also think a part of it is I just think when you have a rematch or when the urgency is much more on one side than the other, I think it always favors the guy or the team that lost the first time. I think Ben
wanted it more. You feel Ben wanted this more than Eubank.
I think Ben had much more motivation, Jack, because he needed to win this fight, or he would have been identified as a guy who could not beat Eubank. He'd be 0-2 against him. And Jack, it's the same thing this week. Okay. I'm in a little group with a couple guys. We pick games. Okay. And Oklahoma played Alabama. And I picked Oklahoma to win the game. They were +6. And I said, they're not going to need the 6. And the biggest reason why I picked the game, Jack, is because historically Oklahoma plays Alabama tough. But if Oklahoma lost the game, their season was done. They have no shot. Where Alabama had that cushion where they could take that second loss and they're still pretty much going to make the playoffs. So I am a big believer in urgency. So if you compound the urgency that Ben had and think that maybe Eubank was a little too sure of himself, and as Little Holmes says, he is younger, I just think the motivation was there. But the fact that I didn't see the fight, I can't speak to it, Jack, because it shouldn't have been where Eubank was never out of it. And some of the guys who we respect their opinion had commented that Eubank looked like he was dead after 2 rounds and had nothing.
Yeah, okay, but looking ahead, there's a pretty good show this weekend. Okay, few good fights, pay-per-view, Saudi Arabia. To me, the most appealing fight is Devin Haney and Brian Norman. Technically, Devin Haney's still unbeaten, even though he lost to Ryan Garcia because Garcia used a substance enhancer. The result was overturned. But we know what we saw in the ring. Haney was knocked down 3 times officially. In reality, it should have maybe been called 5 times because 2 of those were called slips. But despite that, it wasn't lopsided as people were led to believe, because Haney, to his credit, he bit down and he fought back hard. And it was a reasonably close fight. Garcia deserved the decision before it was overturned. But I don't want to hear this, Garcia beat him up bad. Garcia knocked him down several times. Great. But Haney bit down. He showed a lot of perseverance in trying to turn things around. And had the result stood, I didn't look at it as one-sided by any means. But then when you look what happened to Garcia afterwards against Raleigh Romero, he was as bad as, Chris Eubank was against Nigel Benn in that fight. And some people have a theory because he entered the fight clean against Romero, and nothing was helping him out. That's the theory of some people.
Jack, I've said all along that I've liked Brian Norman in this fight. I think Brian Norman is a little underrated. I think he's actually a bigger puncher than Ryan Garcia. And I think the fact that he saw Haney, I know they reversed the decision. I don't care about that. He saw Haney hurt and knocked on his rear end several times during that fight. So I think he goes in as the alpha. I agree with you that Haney is the quicker and he's the better technical boxer. But I think in this fight, I think the physicality of Brian Norman, his aggressiveness, and I think his power and his confidence, I think are going to be the difference. And he's going to win the fight. And let me just say this. I'm down on Haney. I was never as high on him as you were, but I did like him. You can't ignore his talent. However, I'm pretty down on him, and I don't like him in a tough fight right now. So if he comes back and he wins this fight, and it's not controversial, and he just beats Norman up, I will be very impressed by that. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think Norman's physicality is going to overcome whatever deficits he has as a fighter.
Yeah, I was originally extremely high on Haney. I thought he was a generational talent, and I thought he would be his era's equivalent of Pernell Whitaker. Okay, not maybe not as great as Whitaker, but when you talked about the really great, when you talk about the great fighters of Whitaker's era, his name has to come up. He was about as good as anyone during the time he fought during his prime. And I thought that's how we would eventually look at Haney. But now I'm going to tell you, Haney has work to do to just become the next Shane Mosley. Now, he might get there. He might get there. But for that to happen, he's got to beat Brian Norman. And when the fight was originally made, Frank, I agreed with you. I was going with Brian Norman. But the more I thought of it, Brian Norman's a very good fighter. I'm not convinced he's elite. And I think Haney fighting a very conservative, boring, hit and run fight, is going to outpoint Norman. Now,
If Norman lets him do that, Jack, that's the whole
Norman
key.
lets him, well, there's another element that might prevent Haney from doing that. Turkey, His Excellency, he hates fighters who fight like that. And he gets word to them, we're not using you anymore. We're not paying you big money. Unless you're going to fight, you got to exchange now and then.
I don't like that he does that, Jack, and he carries that influence.
Well, he does carry that influence, but look,
I'm sorry. I don't like that at all. No way. Don't tell me how to fight my fight. That means that he might have had a problem with Whitaker or maybe even Mayweather at one time or Howard Davis. No, they're boxers. Let them box. If they don't want, if exchanging is detrimental to them in winning the fight, I don't want him interfering.
Well, he doesn't want a complete safety first fight because Haney fought on the Times Square show where he appointed Jose Ramirez, and he was ultra conservative. Okay, and the other fights were that way to an extent. Not completely. Lopez Barboza, wasn't a bad fight. Both guys.
But Jack, that's who he is. He's a boxer first.
Right. Yeah, but yeah, Joe Bergman puts on Bill Haney is the real annoying one. I think Norman wins as well. Joe Bergman agrees with, Bill Haney acts very vulgar. I'm not a fan of him. Have you ever noticed the fathers of these fighters talk very boldly? They don't have to put up in the ring, but a lot of the fathers. One of them I like a tremendous amount. He's a friend, Teofimo Lopez Sr., but, he's cooled it. He's cooled down the rhetoric, but he was
Shane Mosley's father wasn't like that either.
Shane Mosley's father wasn't like that.
He was pretty laid back.
You look at some of the other dads, the way, Floyd Mayweather Sr., et cetera, et cetera. They're just too many of them, and I kind of don't like it. I understand you got to build fights up, and if the animosity's real, okay, I could understand going back and forth, but sometimes it gets a little too, carried away. But it's what
But
it
today,
is.
Jack, I hate to say it, but you need a shtick because if all they can say about you is you're a nice guy, nobody pays attention to you. So if you don't have a style, like if you're not a killer like Tyson or flashy like Lomachenko, that you have to create your own persona, because if you're just an average guy, look, we talked about this regarding both Spence and Terrence Crawford. We said for years, neither guy has a personality. It's not lighting a fire under the fans to see the fight. And the only drawing thing with that fight was the only element that drew people to that fight was, it really was, well, who was the best? It's like these guys are clearly the two best guys at the weight. They're both undefeated. We have to get them together. But outside of that, Jack, there was really no big draw or interest in that fight because both guys were pretty measured.
Well, and Spence was beaten before the fight because remember when he met Crawford, for the final stare down, he shook his hand. He said, "Thank you for making this fight happen." And Crawford's ultra confident in himself. He says, "No, I was glad to do it." Oh, Angel Garcia comes to mind. Thank you. Angel Garcia is awful.
He was.
But listen, Danny
I
Garcia
disagree with you, Jack, about the about Spence being beat before the fight because he acknowledged Crawford. I think that's such a myth. Just like staring at the guy. Oh, well, he didn't look him in the eye. He's afraid.
No,
Let me tell you something.
Nothing.
Some of the bravest guys out there, they just don't do that. I mean, Evander Holyfield was pretty cordial, yet he was the meanest, most confident guy around during his era. And he wasn't a bully or tried to stare guys down or play that game.
Do you know the stare down? Just because you don't look at an opponent, you're not intimidated. I mean, Sugar Ray Leonard never engaged in the stare down. He said he found it to be a distraction. He didn't like the stare down. Bob Foster looked away. It was so funny when Ray Anderson challenged Bob Foster for the World Light Heavyweight title. They get to the center of the ring, and Ray Anderson says, "I got you where I want you. Look at."
And then ran for 15 rounds.
Away. And then it was the bell ring.
Jack, I disagree with Ray Leonard, though.
Depended on it.
Ray Leonard told a lie.
Ray Leonard what?
He told a lie. Go back and look at his fight against Benitez. That was one of the best stare-ins I ever saw.
I remember that, yeah. But I shouldn't say never. He said it was a distraction. He didn't like doing it.
He smirked a little bit, but he didn't give you the scalp that much.
Fight again. That is a great question, Joe. You got to assume Spence has financial security for the rest of his life. You have to assume that. And yeah, physically, an easy way to answer the question, if Spence fights again, is he going to be successful? And the answer is absolutely not. I think it answers.
Well, it depends who he fights, but if he fights anybody legit, no.
Yeah, exactly. And he's not, for him to come back and have a soft fight for $10,000 in a small club, a farewell fight, yeah, he can win that. But I just think it would end really bad for Spence. I hate to use this term damaged goods, but if there's such thing as putting together a list of one-time outstanding fighters who are now damaged goods, Spence's name would, pop to mind, even though I don't like to use that term. To me, Spence ultimately is going to be in the Hall of Fame. And I think deservedly so. Ultimately, when you look at his body of work, a lot of big wins, great career. I'm not going to define him by the loss to Terence Crawford, even though there are going to be a lot of people who are going to do it. Because let's be honest about it. You mentioned Errol Spence, what pops into your mind first?
Now Crawford.
Yeah, and that's what he's going to have to carry. That's a burden the greatest of fighters have to put up with. Look, one of the all-time great fighters, would you agree with me, was Alexis Arguello? And what do we think about when Arguello's name comes up? It's
kind of sad, but Aaron Pryor. I will say this, Jack. I will say this. I agree with you about Spence. I would not pick him. If he came back and fought anybody in the top 5, I would not pick him to win. I'd actually pick him to lose. However, the more Crawford proves how elite and great that he is, it does make Spence look a little better, and it does cushion the blow a little bit as far as his legacy goes.
But that's an interesting theory you just brought up, Frank. Whether you realize it or not, you brought up a good theory. If you score a monster victory over an opponent, how important is it what the opponent does afterwards? Now, it could be very important, and I'll give you a prime example. Joe Calzaghe trouncing Jeff Lacy. Going into the fight, a lot of people were picking Lacy to win.
I was one of them.
Lacy's been on the cover of Ring Magazine. I picked Calzaghe, but I realized it was an even money fight. After the fight, Lacy fell off the cliff. He never did anything, substantial again. He just, lost a number of fights, just performed poorly. So now when people look at Calzaghe's legacy, and you point to how brilliant he looked against Jeff Lacy at the time when we lauded his, performance.
Now it looks a little less.
Big deal. Yeah, beat Jeff Lacy, big deal. Who is Jeff Lacy? That's what
Jack, that's how fickle fans are. Think about this. Think about George Foreman's comeback. Doesn't that make Muhammad Ali's win over him look even better? The fact that Foreman could come back 10 years later and win the title 10 years after he actually 20 years after he came back 10 years later, but it took him 10 years to win the title. 20 years after losing to Ali, he wins the title at 45, yet Ali beat him at 25 when he was undefeated. That win gets better with time.
I don't know this for sure. No one told me this, but knowing Ali's personality, he was envious, if not very jealous of Foreman, because Ali wanted to be the one to shock the world. He thrived on shocking the world. He had, great sense of humor. He wanted to be the one. Come back at age 45, I shocked the world. And it was Big George who wound up doing it.
You're right about that, but in the process, the fact that he was so successful, it makes Ali beating him look even better. And Crawford, Spence should hope that Crawford goes on to do even greater things because it will make him look better. And I think we're going to look back on Spence Crawford, Jack, and say maybe 5-10 years, and we're going to realize that that was one of the greatest performances we've ever seen in a big fight by two guys at their peak, where one guy just took the other guy apart. And I think that beating, that methodical beating, where he actually plucked Spence apart round by round, and like Secretary, as the race went on, the greater the margin got. And that fight was, as each round progressed, Crawford beat him up more. I think that is going to go down as one of the great victories that we've seen in our lifetime, and we'll realize how much he took out of Spence that night. The only problem with that fight was, Jack, Crawford made it look too easy.
He hurt himself. As crazy as it seems, had that been an epic fight, and let's say Crawford was down 5 rounds to 4 going into
it's a Leonard Hearns fight.
And then he turned it around and knocked Spence out late, in the last round of the fight. Let's say it was up for grabs and he knocked him out sensationally in the last round. We'd be buzzing about Crawford. We'd be giving him a lot more credit than we actually have. That's the ironic part about it.
And Jack, that's the ironic thing about boxing, because there's only two people to measure against each other. Where if it was a victory like Leonard scored over Hearns, where he was losing, then he was winning, then he was losing, then he came back to win, that made him look better. The Duran fight, as close as it was, that made Leonard look good. And you realize both guys were really good. The problem is when you do it like Crawford did, and you see it over and over again, you think, oh, it's too easy. It's 11 rounds of a beatdown. It's too easy. Where if Crawford would have knocked him out in the first round, people would have said, okay, he caught him. That happens. Big deal. It would have been better if it was more competitive. Just like when Frazier beat Ali, same thing. It was competitive, and he proved he had to go through hell to get to the promised land.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that made Sugar Ray Robinson so great. In the rematch against Randy Turpin, he lost the first fight because he was in Paris on a
golfing and playing around.
Yeah, he wasn't ready to fight, and he got upset. He learned the hard way. You can't take a good fighter lightly. You have to be in shape. But for the rematch, he was just a little ahead of Turpin going into the 10th round, I think it was. And he was cut badly and had just one more round. They may have stopped the fight, and he opened up and got Turpin out of there. I mean,
Jack, there's another case where a guy never recovered from a win. Turpin was never the same after that.
No, certain losses take something out of someone as an athlete. We could experience it on another level in life, on a lower level. I'll give you an example. I used to run marathons, Frank. And I had a designated time for me to run the New York City Marathon. I was ready. I was in really good shape. Right a little past the halfway point, I fell apart. It was raining. I had nothing there. It was a miserable race. All the preparations. I had a hard time running it all the next 6 months. I just lost it, It took something out of me, like mentally. But that's what happens to these fighters. Like Ray Leonard was saying, especially when a fighter is beaten for the first time, he loses kind of feeling of invincibility. But to me, it's how you lost. Because when Leonard lost to Duran the first fight, that took nothing out of him mentally. It was, a close fight, great fight, hard fought. But if a fighter gets blown out completely and he thinks he's ready, it's like, wow. I mean, you could make up an excuse, try to justify it in your head, but it's a tough one to get over. Speaking of blowouts, there's on the card in Saudi Arabia. You could cut in with your thought after. I wanted to mention the monster David Benavidez. It's back against Anthony Yarde. A good light heavyweight is Yarde, but Benavidez should stop him.
Yarde's going to try to box and pick his spots to trade. He should be competitive for a while, but I think in the end, Benavidez's aggression and the way he puts his punches together and the way he fights with urgency, I think that'll be the difference. And I'll be surprised if that goes the distance.
Yeah, well, Benavidez, you need him to make a statement. I don't want to see Benavidez win a lopsided decision.
That does hurt his perception, yes.
It does. I don't want to hear, well, I won, I beat him decisively, I knocked him down twice, he didn't win a round. If they have to go to the scorecards.
Well, Jack, at the end of the day, that means something. But if you want to become a star and make the big money and be a draw, you got to give the people a reason to come.
Show me you're a monster. Whet my appetite for a fight against Dimitri Bivol. Whet my appetite, but whet my appetite for a fight against Beterbiev. If Bivol is reluctant to fight you, wouldn't you love to see Beterbiev and Benavidez collide head on?
I would love to see that fight.
Yeah, and
I would love to see that fight.
Beterbiev is
I actually think Benavidez matches up with Beterbiev better than he does Bivol.
Yeah, Bivol's hit and move style could.
He could neutralize. He could. His boxing could be a problem where Benavidez Beterbiev is going to go at it with Benavidez, and I think Benavidez is quicker. Beterbiev is hittable. I've seen him down, although Benavidez has been down too. But I think that makes for a better fight and gives Benavidez a better chance. But Jack, here's what I wanted to touch on our last topic about suffering a loss, and I think you've heard me talk about this. That is why, to this day. And neither one of those guys were great fighters. One of them is no longer with us. But the beating that John Ruiz took at the hands of David Tua in 1996 and the mutilation that Tommy Morrison took against Ray Mercer, and the fact that both of those guys came back and never showed a lack of confidence, or they were never gun shy, and they put it behind them and they fought as if nothing else, as if it never happened. And I don't think people realize, Jack, how much that takes when you get annihilated like they did.
No, it's a little different. I know where you're coming from, Frank, but keep in mind, the mindset is different in two fights like that. David Tua knocked Ruiz out in 19 seconds. He caught him, he knocked him out. He didn't beat him up. He just KO'd him quick. And we both know Tua is one of the bigger punches in the heavyweight division history, even though they don't talk about him as such. And Tommy Morrison won the first 3 rounds against Ray Mercer. Then he got caught against the ropes in the 4th and got savagely knocked out. It's not like he took a beating. A beatdown is what we talked about before. Spence suffering a beatdown against Crawford.
We're talking about two different things, Jack. You're talking about physically. Yes, Ruiz, it was over in 19 seconds, okay? And Tua and Morrison was beating Mercer before the fight stopped. Spence took an outright beating for 9 rounds. Yeah. There's a difference. What I'm saying is mentally, where if you're John Ruiz and you, in your next fight after Tua, and you realize the last time I was here, I got beat so bad that it was over in 19 seconds. I didn't even see what happened to me. And then when you're Morrison and you're winning the fight, and in seconds it's over and you're decimated, I think psychologically, the fact that could happen in a fight that you're winning or just starting and it's over and you were beaten so decisively, I think that's harder mentally to come back from than what Spence would have to overcome. Well,
that's why there's a theory. What should a fighter do after that fight? I mean, there are those like Teddy Atlas, and perhaps correctly so, I should say, who believe it's very important to have a tune-up, not to have a hard fight after that. Just get the success, and build, get the confidence back. And then there are others who feel, take it, I should say, and I feel this way to a large degree. Either the fighter has it or he doesn't. You can get him a couple of wins afterwards. You could talk about the way he's getting his confidence back and this and that. But if he's good enough to eventually be the type of fighter you think he is, he's going to come back. We talked about, listen, Frank, we talked about football early in the show. We like to talk about football. We've seen teams take an absolute beating from another team, and then they play them again late in the season and they beat them. I mean,
It's not the same, Jack. It's not one-on-one. If my team gets beat bad, I can always say, well, I had a great game. I had 10 tackles.
Matchups, Frank. Let's talk individual matchups on the team. A cornerback gets burned by a wide receiver. He could come back and play a good game when they play late in the year.
But Jack, that's different than getting your butt kicked, and I'm going to tell you why. Did you ever get hurt when you boxed?
Yeah. Nose
what did you hurt?
Nose broken a few times, actually, 3 times.
Okay. That's not that big of a deal. Okay. I got my jaw broken. Okay. And I was wired shut for 6 weeks.
That's bad.
And I thought it was a total fluke. And let me tell you something. The very next time I boxed after that, because I had to sit out for a while for my jaw to heal, and then I had to say, will I give it enough time? I have to admit, Jack, I had to go in and get my feet wet and get punched again to realize that I'm okay. That was a one-time thing, and I could deal with it. So that's where I'm coming from. When you get hurt, and remember, and I know this was the case for myself. When I broke my jaw, I believe it was 1978. I was 20 years old. Jack, I didn't think Ernie Shaver, I was a middleweight. I didn't think that Ernie Shavers could hurt me, okay? But when my jaw broke, now I got hit by Alex Ramos. My mouth was open when I got hit, and I got hit on the lower jaw. But the fact of the matter is, I realized at that time, I'm not Superman. I am flesh and bones, and I can be hurt just like anybody else. I never felt that way when I boxed before until I got my jaw broken. I realized I can be hurt, and it does mess with you a little bit. So if you've never been stopped or knocked out and you get brutalized by that, I'm telling you, it can mess with your mind.
Yeah, I see a point as far as that goes. Talk to me about the rumor going on, Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua. Say it ain't so, Frank.
Jack, I can't say it ain't so, but I read it's December 19th, and I heard that Joshua is going to make $180 million. If he is, how can you blame him for doing it?
I would jump on it. I wouldn't blame Joshua for taking 10 million or whatever for the fight, 5 million. What the heck? I don't know what the fight does. I can't see any way Jake Paul can win that fight unless Joshua truly is a shot fighter, which is, it's possible. But even the remnants of Joshua remaining, what's left, the 40% of Joshua should be more than enough to beat Paul. And no disrespect to Paul, who's a real fighter now. He's not a YouTuber. He's a boxer. He's paid his dues, Frank. He's a legitimate boxer. It hasn't always shown up in the opponents he's fought. I get that, if you want to point to his record. But he's been training like a boxer for years. And I can believe that we could see the best version of Jake Paul in this fight, meaning possibly he's a borderline competent, not world class, not contender, but borderline competent 10-round fighter now, perhaps. But Joshua is still the guy up like that, way past his peak.
Little Holmes, I agree. It is an insult, but if the heavyweight greats of the past could go in, they would take the $180 million.
Ali fought
Jack,
Antonio Inoki. Come on, this is at least a legitimate.
I mean, you could,
boxing match.
I mean, if you look at it that way, you can, but at least everybody kind of knew that was a show. And that's the thing. We don't know if this is a show. I know this much. If Joshua hits Jake Paul like he hit Ngannou, Paul's going. And Joshua has a lot on the line in this because, let's face it, if Paul makes it to the second round, Joshua's going to start getting excoriated for not being able to get rid of him. So he has a little bit on the line here. These fights it's so hard to make sense of these fights, Jack. I still read today where guys say that Tyson carried Paul. So I don't know what these deals are. I don't think that he did. He's 60 years old. But look, the money dictates. And once again, I will go back to your buddy, Floyd Mayweather, who gave us exhibition and not boxing.
Well, but the Mayweather exhibitions, I can't recall them doing business that was that great. But this is a legitimate fight.
The McGregor fight was the second highest grossing fight of all time.
No. Well, Tyson Paul was entertainment, and we didn't know how real it might be. And we still don't. That's the funny thing about it. Listen, I think Tyson Paul was a real fight. And I think Tyson was trying, but when you're 58 years old, and I think Paul was happy to just pile up points and win a decision, because I think Paul has a tremendous affection for Tyson. Even when he talks now, he says Tyson did great. He came up with a strong fight. He made a lot of money. He's protective of Tyson when people put Tyson down after the fight. And Tyson liked Paul as well. There was this bond between them. But let me ask you this, just the opposite. You said if Joshua hits Paul, Paul's going to go. Paul's a pretty hard puncher. You'd agree on that. He can whack. We've seen
He shouldn't be able to hurt Joshua.
And Joshua chin is pretty questionable. We know that, correct? What happens if Joshua, if Paul does hit him flush a couple of times? With his power.
I don't think it will affect him, Jack, but if it does, I think boxing loses credibility. If Paul wins, if he makes it to if he goes the distance and they score the fight and he loses, boxing still loses credibility. There's no way a guy with 12 fights at that level should be able to go rounds with a guy who was at one time was one of the elite heavyweights in the world.
At one time, but Joshua's last fight was against Daniel Dubois. He got stopped in 5 rounds. He looked bad on balance, okay? He stunned Dubois once and then got knocked out right after. Let's say you get a worse version of Joshua in this fight, which is possible because he's coming off a stoppage loss and he's an older fighter now. I'm trying to make a case for Paul. I like to you can make a case for anything. And that would be the case that this isn't the Anthony Joshua, that we remember in any way, shape, or form. I mean, Joshua's probably going to win the fight. Don't get me wrong. But it's size-wise. Joshua's a big guy. He weighs in the 240s, correct?
And what's Paul, about 210?
Paul, I think, came in like 199 or something his last fight.
Because I know Paul's been as heavy as in the 220s.
So
he has been that high.
Put on weight. So Paul, might be just bulking up to be big. I don't see this fight coming off when you say next month in December. What are they going to do? Rush this fight on us?
Well, Jack, how much training should Joshua need? I mean, he should be able to, just like Fury, he should be able to roll out of bed and beat Jake Paul without training at all.
You got to promote the fight. Jake
Paul will do that, Jack. That's not a big deal.
There's not a lot of time to do it. And it's November 17th already. Come on. And you're not going to.
1 month. That's plenty of time. What else is going on in the next month in boxing? Nothing. That's plenty of time. I don't think promotion will be the problem. I really don't. I actually think we'll be saturated with it. I don't think promotion will be the problem with this, Jack. And if Jake Paul wins, he'll be as big as Mike Tyson or Mayweather or Ali ever were for a couple days.
Well,
and I don't want to live in that world.
Lamont Roach is fighting Isaac Cruz. To me, that's not a big fight. But Lamont Roach, who fought a draw with Tank Davis, it's his first fight back. And a lot of people feel that Lamont Roach should have gotten the decision.
Yes, Netflix.
It would be on Netflix.
That's what I saw.
Well, you're talking
Jack,
about
who knows how many people know who Pitbull is or Lamont Roach? Nobody knows, but they all know who Jake Paul is. All the younger guys today know who Jake Paul is. The guys who, at the age they are now, we were obsessed with boxing. Now they're obsessed with MMA and Jake Paul. And I even think MMA is kind of losing a little bit of its steam too. Would you agree?
I was never a fan of the MMA, UFC. Nothing against it at all. I'm not putting it down in any way, shape, or form. But it just never caught on to me for whatever reason. I mean, boxing's always seemed to be a little bit in the class.
Well, that's what we came up with, where the guys that are 40 today came up with MMA. So it is a little bit different. It has grown on me.
I mentioned Tank. Well, getting off that, I mentioned Tank Davis a little while ago. Would you say Tank Davis is the biggest waste of talent in boxing?
That's a great question, Jack. I would say right now,
how many fighters could have been so much more? And you have cases of fighters. Their legacy is what could have been. Like I wrote in my Michael Spinks book, one of the people I write about, because he comes up in a chapter, is James Scott, who was incarcerated, fought out of jail. He showed what a great fighter he was with the fights he won in jail against a number of contenders, including a resounding victory over Eddie Mustafa Muhammad. But in the case
he beat Yaki Lopez too, right?
Yaki Lopez too. But in the case of James Scott, his legacy is always going to be what could have been. He's a what could have been story. And that's a cruel way to think of a guy, to put it, or what could have been. But it's cruel and it's upsetting when the guy has fate in his own hands. Cruel fate wasn't thrust upon him, where a guy just wasted it for whatever reason. And I think we're kind of getting that with Tank Davis.
I think so. I think that's fair. I mean, James Scott, in a way, maybe benefited by being incarcerated for the fact that his conditioning, he would never get out of condition. That's all he had to do. But who knows what kind of sparring partner he could get in there. I'm sure he cleaned everybody out the jail. And Dwight was my man too, Little Holmes.
That was a close fight, though. I thought Howie definitely deserved the decision 6-4, but it was a competitive fight. And Scott
Jerry Martin actually beat Scott more conclusively than Dwight did, because he had him down a couple times.
You think about wasted talent. There was this former lightweight champion from California a lot of years ago. I actually met him and interviewed him one time in Canastota. He's not alive now. Mando Ramos. Okay,
I remember him.
He was a young phenom. He won the title when he was 20 years old. He beat Carlos Tio Cruz in their rematch. He started late in the first fight and lost a very close decision. In the rematch, he stopped Cruz on cuts. But he lived life in the fast lane, in the crazy lane. He could have.
Jack, that was more. Manuel Ramos's brother.
No, he wasn't Manuel Ramos's brother, the heavyweight from Mexico. No.
I thought it was.
No, he wasn't. Completely different there. Manuel Ramos, I don't have to tell you, Frank, got his fame in the 2-round shootout against Smokin' Joe Frazier, in 1968 at Madison Square Garden, because he went toe-to-toe with Smokin' Joe.
Hit him with a big uppercut in the first round.
Yeah, right. He stunned Joe and had him in a little trouble there. Yep. And even Joe said afterwards he was dazed. But I guess people didn't mind a short fight if a fighter goes down fighting and throws caution to the wind. But people were thinking, oh, this is a promising heavyweight. But in reality, any heavyweight, if he throws caution to the wind and goes all out, and he gets stopped in the round or two, people might rave about him, but it's not showing as much about his potential as you might think it does.
And that was and the sad part was that was a peaking Joe Frazier that Ramos had to deal with that night because he had just got the.
Wow, I'm sorry I cut in, Frank.
Go ahead.
You talk about a loss psychologically ruining a guy. I want to talk about a heavyweight from that era. Tell us about what the loss to Jerry Quarry did for Thad Spencer, who some people thought was the best heavyweight in the world in Ali's absence.
Boy, there's another one because he was the number one contender for a little while. He was yelling for Ali. He was, in fact, had Ali not been exiled, there were papers being drawn for them to fight where he was going to defend against Thad Spencer. Spencer was on a roll until he fought Quarry. Quarry took him apart and he just fell off the wagon after that. And I think he got into some substances and didn't make his way into the gym much. And then he went on a losing streak.
Yeah, well, he was in the 8-man WBA heavyweight elimination tournament and upset Ernie Terrell
in the first round.
He was favored to win the tournament. He was a heavy favorite over Quarry in that fight. And Quarry stopped him with 3 seconds to go.
But he had him down a couple times too, though, Quarry did. That was one of Quarry's better fights.
It was. When you talk about Jerry Quarry in his great victories, no one mentions Thad Spencer because Spencer fell off the cliff. No one realizes how highly regarded Spencer was at the time, where there were people, like I said, who thought he was the best heavyweight in the world outside of Ali at that time. So when you think of Quarry, you say, oh, Ron Lyle, Ernie Shavers, Mac Foster, because those fights took place in New York. But no one gives him credit for a dominating performance against that Spencer, who was heavily favored to win that fight.
Isn't that something? How what your opponent does after you fight affects how your legacy is. And you know what? I've been guilty of that too. When I've had to list the guys who Quarry beat, I always forget about Spencer because after that, he didn't do anything.
We don't give Quarry much credit, and we should, for his 2 fights with Floyd Patterson. One was a draw. The other Quarry got the decision. It was disputed, but I don't think it was unfair. Could have gone either way, the rematch. But Patterson was a top-of-the-line fighter. Say what you want about him, a top-of-the-line fighter. And Quarry, matched them in their 2 fights. There wasn't any serious separation between the 2 of them. And that's
just think, Jack, if Patterson wins that tournament, we would have gotten Liston Patterson 3 perhaps again.
Oh, he would have won.
It works out chronologically because Liston was active in '68. If Patterson wins that tournament, you could hear Liston yelling that I should be fighting for the title, the WBA title that Ali stole from me.
Well, what would have happened had Liston been allowed in the WBA heavyweight tournament? You can argue he wouldn't have won it because Leotis Martin stopped him a year later. But you also have to think it would be a better Liston because he would have been in really top shape if he was in the tournament. It wouldn't have just been another fight.
I would have picked Liston going in to be the favorite to win the tournament. I couldn't make a case for any fighter in that tournament to beat him. The only guy I think that probably would have given him the most trouble would have been a guy that he was familiar with, was probably Ernie Terrell. Stylistically, might have been the guy to give him the most trouble because he could stay away and box. And Liston wasn't quite the killer, Jack, in '68 that he was in '64 or '63.
You know who would have given him maybe the most trouble? Oscar Bonavena. Because Bonavena was a tough guy. Liston wasn't going to just walk through Bonavena. And Bonavena
I think Sonny would have controlled him with the jab, which Frazier couldn't and Ali couldn't. But I think Liston's jab might have been the difference. But he might be the next guy that you would say. And you could also say that maybe Jimmy Ellis, if he could stick and move and get it and out and box him. But I don't know. I don't know if he could beat Sonny in '68.
Ellis never would have beaten a good version of Sonny Liston.
Jack, I saw you on with Keith Engel. I think it was a replay on Saturday. And you guys, I saw the replay on Saturday. I don't know when you did the show. But you were talking a lot about boxing. In fact, Keith mentioned who would win if you and I faced each other. And you said, because I'm bigger, it's me. But if you asked me, I would say I would kill you.
I would have probably won because I would have made you make weight. You would have been all dried out, starved out. You would have come in at 147 pounds or so.
I don't think I could have got down that low, Jack. But you mentioned on that broadcast, and I know this, but I've never heard you say why. You said that Jimmy Ellis was your favorite fighter, and you kind of compared him to yourself as a writer. Yeah. Now, I was a big Ellis fan. There was something about him that I liked because I just think he was an overall good guy, and I think most of his career he was overlooked and underrated. What was it about him? Like, did you root for him when he fought Ali? Did you root for him when he fought Quarry?
Yeah, I rooted for him in all his fights. There was something you have to admire a guy who was a career middleweight,
right.
And they threw him in with the, killers in the middleweight division. I mean, who did he fight? Georgie Benton, Holly Mills, Ruben Hurricane Carter.
King Carter, right.
None of those guys knocked him out. They would win decisions over him. He had no management, no this, no that. And he writes a letter to Angelo Dundee, and he comes out of the clear blue, Ellis, he was Ali's sparring partner, boyhood friend. He reportedly split 2 fights with Ali in the amateurs. And to just beat Johnny Pearsall, who was a
first round.
Heavyweight. Yeah, first round. And then in the tournament to come through. What I like about Jimmy Ellis, some of these fighters mirror things in life. I always said Ali and Frazier and those guys were so great. I can't relate to them because they're so great in what they do. And I wouldn't tell anyone to try to be, you can try to be as great as they can, but don't think you failed if you're not. Those guys are rare. But Jimmy Ellis was excellent, sometimes outstanding, excellent, but he wasn't great. I was able to relate to him, a guy who got everything out of his talent. I mean, what more could Ellis have done in his career? He certainly never underachieved. And, and there was some very good wins. Decisively beats George Chuvalo, Oscar Bonavena, Leotis Martin. He beats Quarry, even though a healthy version of Quarry, the best version of Quarry against the best version of Ellis. If they fought 5 times, it's 3-2 either way. That's what I think. But I don't know who would get to the 3 first, but it would be compelling stuff, But and why do we have who's your favorite fighter of all time? Why do we even have a favorite fighter? We don't even understand why sometimes.
I mean, I would have to say Ali because it was his persona that drew me to love boxing. But I mean, I could there's too many that I could name that are right under Ali. And as I've said, Jack, over the years, I have a friend who I discuss boxing with a lot. And as I get older, Ali's still my favorite, but he has come down a little bit in my, I don't know about my book, but in my mind, where I don't quite, not quite as enthralled with him as I was at one time. But his personality was just so overwhelming. And you can, I don't know if you can relate to this. I think you can. But when he fought, when we were in our teens, it just didn't seem that the world was in balance if he lost. To me, if Ali got beat, it didn't seem like the world was in balance, where if he won, that meant everything was fine. And I'll never forget this, Jack. And it was when I first realized about race and color of skin and things like that don't mean anything. I remember when he fought Jerry Quarry the first time. And I remember thinking, now I was 12 years old, and I remember thinking, I really want Quarry to win because he's white. He looks like me. And I remember thinking that was the one fight that my father didn't take me to because my 6th grade teacher sent a letter home from school that I was disrupting the class, and he punished me by not taking me to that fight. But he said, I'll call and I'll tell your mother when the fight's over who won. And I remember thinking, what do I want that call to say? In a way, I kind of want Quarry to win because he looks like me. But I kind of, if she says, look, Frank, Ali won the fight, that will be what I expected. I will have expected Quarry to have lost. If she would have told me that Ali lost, I would have been really uncomfortable with that. And that showed me a lot about how I look at people that aren't like me as I got older. But I was a big Quarry fan back then. I loved him. And I have to admit, a lot of it was because he looked like me and he was good.
Quarry persevered because every time his career took a dip, he would rise again, take a dip, rise again. And he'd get these big wins. He loses to Ellis in the WBA tournament, but then, he had his bad back after. It took him a little while to come back, but he comes back.
He comes back and he kills Buster Mathis.
Right, he beats Buster Mathis decisively. And Buster Mathis had only lost one fight yet against Joe Frazier.
To Frazier the year before.
Then he loses to Ali in Atlanta. That was the one regret of Quarry's career, he told me, the first fight against Ali. Quarry told me the Ali to Sonny Liston fight, when I interviewed him, he never could have beaten, wouldn't have had any type of chance in the slightest against. He wouldn't have had a prayer beating the Ali to beat Liston. But he said the Ali coming off the layoff, he believes he could have beaten that Ali because Quarry said he was in the best shape of his career by far for the first fight. He was in perfect physical condition. And he felt Ali couldn't have gone to 15 rounds with only 6 weeks of training. That's the only version of Ali he felt he ever would have had a chance of beating.
That's a pretty honest assessment, Jack. And I have to admit, there are 3 fighters of my lifetime who I never met, who I wish I could have met or spoke with. Jerry Quarry's one of them. Rocky Marciano's one, and so are Sonny Liston. That is and Quarry's the guy I always wanted to meet him and talk boxing with him. I think his assessment is very honest. That if there was ever a night that maybe he could have beat Ali, it was that night. But Jack, if you look at the style matchup, there's no night that Jerry Quarry could have defeated Ali because, Jack, Jerry Quarry, as much as I love him, he was vulnerable to everybody he fought with a good left jab. And at that time, Ali's was the best. And that alone would be it's just a nightmare for Quarry to try to negotiate with.
We only have like a little over a minute left, but I'm just going to say, if I had to meet any one fight in history, thank you, Little Holmes. If any one fight in history to sit down with, pick his brain in private, spend the day, believe it or not, it would have been Jim Jeffries. I would have talked to him about all the racial hostility,
really,
fight with Jack Johnson. I would have picked his brain, what he was thinking and how people perceive him, out of the ring for 6 years. He loses to Johnson and people are talking like Johnson beat the real Jim Jeffries.
Don and I were talking about that fight last week.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Listen, it's a coming down having me on after having Don on, because Don is the ultimate historian.
We had a really good show and we covered a lot of ground, and I told him that we definitely want him back. He was really good.
Don is great, without question. Okay, so
but we didn't fight, Jack, like I fight with you. Don and I got along. Yeah, I hope that doesn't disappoint you, but we got along fine.
You got to know Don a little better, then the fighting will begin. But Don is great. He's a good friend.
Oh, he's a gentleman.
Let's start. So we're summing up. You like Brian Norman. I like Devin Haney. I like Haney by decision to hit and run. You like Norman by a KO or decision?
Jack, I don't like picking the exact result, but on this one, I'm going to say that I think Norman stops Haney, probably late.
Okay.
I do think he's going to be. I think he's going to be very aggressive and draw from what he saw Ryan Garcia do to Haney. And my final thought is this: the Philadelphia Eagles, Brian, are going to be the Super Bowl champions, and they will run the table basically for the rest of the year. If I say a mosquito can pull a plow, don't ask how, hitch him up.
Good night, everyone.